Yeah, I guess I would say um, after the tragic situation happened with Cassandra and her family and the loss of her son, she had reached out to my office and sat down to tell me her story. And as we went through the different events that led ultimately to the death of her son, we found there were several loopholes. There were several areas where we failed her as a state, where we failed her overall, whether it was legislation. She had reached out multiple times for help, whether it was with the National Guard, and we didn't provide that to her. So when we sat down and we looked at the existing laws and how they're being implemented or not being implemented, we could have done, a one-off. We could have done something to do with GPS monitoring for domestic abusers or violence abusers. We could have done several things like that that would have been maybe helpful, but instead we took the approach of putting together a task force so that we have professionals in the room, but not just professionals. We also have survivors on this, so it's very survivor-driven, and we felt that would be the best way of trying to analyze all of the existing laws, what we're doing for education, and just in general, domestic violence. And that's the approach that we're taking. Instead of just a one bill to maybe fix a minor part, we're looking at it overall.
I was taking a look at the legislation that would create the task force. You got quite a list of co-sponsors and people signing on just to join up. I mean, this is the definition of an issue that will cross the aisle. You can get support in this building. How do you make sure that this task force just keeps going? And because there's a running theme in this building where you hear about there's a task force for everything. How does this task force? How do you plan on keeping this going to the point where we do see those changes down the road?
Yeah, the task force is named after Colton. We refer to it as Colton's task force, and knowing and referencing that I think is important, because Cassandra's going to be involved with this task force as well, and other survivors. If you've ever met Cassandra or have an opportunity to work with her, she is on a mission. And these other survivors who have gone through tragic events, I think it's very hard to silence them. So I think making it survivor-driven, which is much different than any other task force, is going to continue to drive this discussion forward.
Well, unfortunately, September 21st, 2019, when Christopher Miller had came into my home and brutally and violently attacked me, strangled me, left me what he thought was dead on my floor, while he proceeded to go upstairs, where ultimately he murdered Colton in the most violent way possible by shooting him 10 times and then attacking my 9-year-old daughter, and then ultimately getting her out of the house alive. And then the few days to follow, really the initiative that came to me while I was doing the mourning process, while I was putting my son to rest forever, holding him for the last time at the funeral home, a warm, healthy boy, who just a few days ago was here, was great, was now cold. And I had to say goodbye to him forever. And in that moment did I realize that I had to make this change. I had to be the voice, because I was given a second voice. I was given a voice that's unwavering, driven by a surviving voice of a domestic violence situation, who ultimately went to the lowest part of tragedy when Colton's life was taken forever at 18 months old. I had just barely gotten my son back from being cremated when I actually went to David's office, my state rep through my county, and I placed his urn up on his desk, and I said, "This is Colton Miller. You need to meet him, and you need to help us. You need to help us change Illinois for domestic violence, that they can see that ultimately what happens in every aspect of, from police to the judicial system to him." Unfortunately, Chris was in the National Guard representing this uniform with disgrace. All these aspects played into the untimely, tragic death of my son, where I sounded the alarm multiple times and no one listened. And I don't ever want another mother or father to have to hold their son and say goodbye, or their daughter and say goodbye. And at that point, I knew with my tenacity, with my mother's love, that I can be that voice, and through my own heartache, it's going to be impactful. And my son is going to be alive forever with each life that is saved through the domestic task force, Colton's task force.
The ways that you had mentioned, there were a few loopholes. You had said that you sounded the alarm multiple times. Can you give me a couple just particulars on, where that failed, and does that provide and then follow-up question for you, does that kind of provide a starting point for what you would like this task force to really focus on?
Yeah, I think you can.
The Illinois National Guard reporting his behaviors, reporting the abuse, reporting his drug use, reporting that he had a criminal background, the FOID revocation, he was not supposed to be lawfully even having weapons nor owning a FOID card. That was being ignored. The judicial system, which they were forcing me to be a witness in an aggravated battery that he had against another gentleman for a felony charge. I repeatedly had told them my warnings that he's not supposed to have weapons, he's scaring me. And ultimately they kept blowing me off and telling me just, it's not going to happen, everything's going to be okay. To just friends, family reaching out, going towards as many people as I could, telling them this is why I moved out, this is what's going on. And just no one listening. Unfortunately, as a domestic violence victim, people don't want to listen, right? They don't want to believe what's in front of them. And now they have to. They have to realize that those warnings, those things that this person, the abuser, has been continuously doing, needs to be heeded and needs to be reminded and remembered and move forward to be able to stop them from, unfortunately, the deadly aspect of what domestic violence truly is. And I know that with David's help and with all the other sponsors who have continuously shown their support of the Domestic Violence Task Force and ultimately the committee today, that we are going to be that change. We are going to change history for Illinois to be able to incorporate all aspects to create a safer place for everybody.
And one of the other parts I think that we've touched on before, Cassandra, where it failed you, and maybe it's not necessarily state legislation, but education, when you were pregnant with Colton.
Absolutely. About telling my doctor that I felt unsafe and checking that checklist, and then calling me while I was still in the car with the abuser, and it played over my car speaker. And then at that point, him realizing I was trying to get help. And if anyone knows anything about domestic violence, when you reach for help, it's when you are the most vulnerable for the deadly attacks that can possibly take place. And then they realize that you are no longer standing for their behavior, you are no longer condoning it, you are trying to voice the opinion. And unfortunately, domestic violence is not supported in the way that it should, and we're going to find a way to close those gaps, to show the education purpose, to show how important it is for everyone, all entities, everyone to work together, every district to come together, to come to one understanding. This is not a Democratic thing. This is not a Republican thing. This is literally an Illinois thing. This is an epidemic that's not a quarantine case, and we all have to work together to be able to keep Illinois a safe place.
Absolutely.
What made you think, okay, this is who I need to go to. I'm going to go to my state legislature to try to make this change. How and why did you have that trust there?
Because I know that independently, right, each legislator, each representative, each senator, our governor, everybody is independently beautiful, wonderful people who all have the ultimate aspect to make Illinois a productive, safe state. But when there is not the continuous aspects where we work together and we open that communication from one person to another, and we all have different agendas, we lose that. And I knew that in Kendall County, when I met State Rep, I did not know him personally. I just knew he was the person that I go to who's supposed to represent me, to be able to come forth and to be able to help me in, unfortunately, the most tragic situation. So did I have faith when I walked forth? No. But upon meeting with David, upon our conversation, upon him meeting Colton and meeting myself and my daughter eventually, I realized that that faith, it has to be there, because there are people who are more than willing to step forward and also be the voice that actually can make that difference. So a collaboration of everybody, you have to have faith still, right? Because you can't just walk away from it. And if I walked away from this and just mourned silently, I'd be failing every other domestic violence victim in the past. I'd be failing my own family, and I'd be failing the future of Illinois for domestic violence. So you have to have faith. And I know that through this process, all of them, they all actually want to help. It's just a matter of correspondence of getting that help into action, and that's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
You sat in front of a committee today. I mean, was this the first time you've spoken to a panel of lawmakers like that? And I know you've been seeing all the names getting signed to the legislation and everything.
She actually helped get some of those names on there by making calls to individual
really?
legislators.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I just independently called them, or I would show up there. And again, when he said they have not met Cassandra Tanner Miller, he means that, because my tenaciousness in it, and everything is done with poise and elegance and from love, just of the selflessness of me wanting to relive this horrendous day over and over again. I'm going to do it regardless. I might as well do it with a purpose.
Does she get named honorary member of the task force, or what? I mean,
So the way that the task force works, there's originally started at 18 members. We ended up adding 5 additional members, bringing it to 23. And those 5 additional members, like I talked about, making sure it was survivor driven. Each caucus, so Democrats, Republicans in the House and Senate, and then the governor will have appointments of one survivor from each one of their caucuses to sit on the task force. So Cassandra, of course, would be appointment from our caucus, and then they also get to appoint legislators and then experts as well.
Got it. Okay. I was just wondering if they were just going to go ahead and let you chair the whole thing.
I mean, if only, but the problem is that you need, what we were talking about, the faith in it, you need that professionalism in every aspect to be able to bind and to complete that, right? We're all puzzle pieces, ultimately going to formulate this beautiful puzzle where we don't have to have another mother or a father sitting here talking about the loss of their child or their loved one in order to create a safer place. And ultimately that it takes everybody. It takes just regular people working in a normal job. It takes a legislator, it takes the government, it takes every single aspect to work together to be able to fix Illinois' domestic violence problem.
And I hope, with this task force, we'll be able to change maybe some of the perceptions about task force, in the sense that this will be one that is productive, that is going to give recommendations, and it's what we do after this task force that's really going to be truly what is remembered from this and what is going to happen in the future of Illinois. So I think it's going to come with a lot of really good recommendations. It's going to be then turning that into legislation and implementing that. Some of it's not going to be education. Some of it's going to be working. It's called the Intergovernmental Domestic Violence Task Force, meaning there are units of local government that are not communicating and working together today to help combat domestic violence. We want to put an end to that. They need to be working together. There needs to be communication.
I've been here on the full-time job 7 months, talked with my fair share of task force and everything.
Oh.
But is that a normal practice, or has this been done before to include survivors or any sort of person directly impacted to come on and be a part of the task force, rather than just be the the panelists that may come in front and talk to them for a few minutes?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there have been prior ones. I can tell you the feedback that we got after initially putting it in was from groups saying, you need some survivors involved if you really want to get something done. You want to make sure that you have them included, you have their feedback. I think Cassandra and some others will be able to provide. We're talking about maybe making changes, but they've had to live this. Maybe they can help us understand what we're going to do and how it may impact what's existing out there.
And will there? I mean, it said governor's office, and then each caucus will be appointing a survivor to join the task force. I mean, what? There's often you get a witness slip or something where people outside can include their own feedback. Are you guys going to be making any efforts to reach out to more survivors across the state and try to include them in the process, or is
Yeah.
this something for after the fact once the legislation starts to really get filled out?
I would say that's kind of been going on. I mean, survivors have seen your story and have reached out to you, no?
Absolutely, and I actually run a Facebook page called Colton's Legacy, and I actually talk about domestic violence. I share my story. I blog from the very beginning, almost the week after, about just what it's like to be a grieving mother, but also a survivor of domestic violence. And I have countless people who have reached out and has shown and shared their stories with me through this. And the outreach, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people watch my videos. They listen to it. They follow me regularly. A lot of them have given their own witness slips to just being able to be supportive of this bill. So absolutely. I mean, I think every aspect of it, as much intel and as much behind the scenes as we can possibly find out. I encourage people, please reach out to me. Please give me your story. Please tell me where you've been failed, where we could use this to be able to further back and to further look into the aspect of how we can help out in every aspect, because domestic violence doesn't have the boundaries, but it also doesn't have a specific scheme in which it follows through. So my situation, my domestic violence experience obviously is extremely tragic. But I've always said abuse is abuse no matter how small. And I encourage them to please step forward, please give witness, please contact all of us and be able to share this so then that we can close up those
You and I have even met with a survivor.
Absolutely. We
I've
just
talked
did
to
a few
survivors
days
as
ago.
well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of that came driven from, is that we could do just a very itty bitty part of that where he said we could just focus on this. But the problem is that's where we've been falling behind. We need to focus on the big picture. We need to find a way to incorporate every aspect of anyone who could touch the lives and possibly save lives in Illinois.